In some sense, if you see the history of higher education in India, as we call it as higher education, which is also tertiary education, you will find that the Britishers set the tone, and roughly before the Second World War, around 1920 or 1925, the big universities came along at Calcutta, Bombay, Madras and Delhi, and subsequently around the Second World War and thereafter, the need for professional education was more and more felt, and the society soon after independence went into professional education in a big way. As a matter of fact, I would say that there are two rackets that were promoted by Indian society. The first one, that you have to have two children, and one has to be an engineer, the other person has to be a doctor, no matter what is the sex actually. The second is in terms of, you can say that the professional education became so important that all the other aspects of education, such as classical education, for instance, which was promoted by the Britishers in the pre-independence era, started going down and down. And if today, if you see many social problems, if I at least believe that a lot of our social problems which are being faced in the country as well as in the world is because of the lack of liberal arts education in the country. So whether it is the handwriting of the people, whether it is the thinking of the people, whether it is in terms of behavior of the people, whether in terms of what you can call as the very large enlightened view of the world, you will find all these aspects are becoming less and less critical in education, and hence they are showing up in our social problems. So you will find that as a society you may create doctors and engineers, but you are not creating the good human beings actually. Somebody in one of the workshops said, कि बंदे को पहले बंदा तो बनाओ. So in some sense you will find that the education has in some sense arrived at a point where हम लोग बंदा नहीं बनाते हैं, engineer बनाते हैं या doctor बनाते हैं, मतलब sort of, So in some sense you will find that the issues that motivated for creating the model that we are going to present today for Avantika, the main motivators are, the first point is that there are many surveys, and particularly NASSCOM keeps on saying that only 20% people are employable. As a matter of fact, the size of the cohorts is so large that only 1 out of 6 today, and very soon 1 out of 8 person is likely to be an employable person. So obviously the question of skills, the question of personality, the question of knowledge is becoming very critical. There is also a very strong emphasis on analysis in our education as compared to synthesis. Probably that's very difficult to teach, or probably very difficult to interact with in some sense, but the analysis aspects have been so highly well beaten that people with synthesis capabilities are less and less. There is also a feeling that the left brain and the right brain, you will find that we systematically not develop the right side of the brain in our education in some sense. It's very difficult in some sense, or very impractical. I guess there is also a certain amount of individualism that is creeping in the society. People are looking at me, and my career, my family. In fact, the relationship between an individual and society is a very critical relationship, and that relationship doesn't get emphasized enough in the education process, where what is the relationship between the society and the individual is also very important. There has been another conspiracy of what is called as the PCM. When you see that admissions are given in many, many colleges, and the only thing that they worry about it is PCM. So if I am good in Marathi, if I am good in English, if I am good in economics, it has zero value. Now this is something which, according to me as a society, absolutely unacceptable, in the sense that all branches of knowledge should be respected. To say that only if you know physics, chemistry and mathematics, you will be admitted into this program and otherwise you will not be admitted. To me, that is something extremely uneducationist attitude actually. So in some sense, you will find that some of these things have crept up in our society over the last 40-50 years, particularly in the education sector. Probably because of practical difficulties, but you will find that many of these admission processes, many of these career selection processes, many of these education pedagogy processes are the issues that are haunting us, and therefore there was a feeling that can we create something better. So what Manoj said, I think the title is What is Next in Education. So today you will find that the shrink wrap assembly line education that is going on, and the large number of universities, large number of IITs, large number of NITs. In fact, in MHRD once I told as a joke that I said if anybody needs birth control measure, MHRD is the first one. Because the number of institutions they are promoting is just too many actually, sort of, So, of course, humor is not a part of MHRD. That I understood very painfully. I guess the motivation, as I said, there are 4 elements of education which I consider is very important for any human being, as a matter of fact. First one, I call it as a classical education. Classical education is very important. Some people study Sanskrit, some people study Latin, some people study history, some people study geography, some people study economics. I think all these are lateral inputs in your development. So even if you want to be a good engineer, and if you don't know economics, you may not be a good engineer. So obviously the question of being a good economics person is important for being a good engineer. Similarly, if you are a good liberal arts person, you may be a good designer, because in order to be a good designer, lateral education of liberal arts is extremely important. So to some extent, the first element is classical education. I call it as classical. The second one is professional. If you just have classical education, probably you may be a good individual, but you may not get a job. And therefore, you have to have some professional training of some profession, whatever profession that you select. That is the second thing. The third important component of education is personal education. How good are you as a human being in terms of whether it is philosophy, whether it is psychology, whether it is in terms of other aspects of your individual culture. When I was in France, a friend of mine's grandchild was in school in 6th grade, and he was studying. So I said, what are you studying? And he says, I'm studying philosophy, grade 6. Philosophy. I was so stunned. I said that how come in a school in France, they are teaching a subject called philosophy, and at grade 6. So I tried to study. I asked, okay, what is your textbook? Unfortunately, it was in French, and so I couldn't read it. But believe it or not, that an education system which promotes a subject called philosophy at the grade 6 is a very important lesson for all of us to understand what is education all about. The second one is professional. I need not belabor on it. Actually, all of us are very familiar with the enormous emphasis of professional education that is placed in India, and probably because of the job market which drives the education process in some sense. Personal education, when you see these suicides, when you see these people turning into extremists, when you see some of the people becoming crazy in some sense, I would say that in order for a human being, the personal education is very important, whether it is psychology, whether it is philosophy, whether it is religion, whether it is culture, whether it is sports. But that aspect of education is also going down in our today's education process. And the last but not the least important part, I call it as national education. I remember the Chinese aggression happened in 1962, and all of us were made to go through NCC compulsory for 3 years. At that time, of course, all of us hated it in some form. But today you will find that that element of NCC education at least makes you a good human citizen. Similarly, today when you see so many social problems, I was a member of the National Security Advisory Board, and there are generals and ambassadors and many of these very high-profile people. One thing I understood is that the security issue affects every single individual. But every single individual doesn't know what is security. It is all centraled in Delhi and some offices and some officers. Frankly speaking, it should be a common concern of all of us to understand what is national security, or security for that matter. So in some sense, according to me, because of the complexity of the world, you will find that we also need national education, personal education, professional education, and classical education. So these are some of the thoughts. I would say that educational institutions are changing very rapidly. What was there 50 years back is not going to be the same today. You will find that the physical infrastructure required for an educational institution is different. The second and the most important part is the digital infrastructure that is required in an educational institution is also changing very rapidly. And the third one, which according to me is the spaces that are required. In fact, the formal classroom is probably the most inconvenient way for teaching learning process. When you have got this discourse-oriented or a Senate room type of a classroom where 200 students or 300 students, personally I think you get lost completely in that classroom and you have no mechanism. The good old way of classical music education probably was very ideal, that you have got one teacher, one student, very interactive, very immersive, and the assessment part. There are three elements. One is the curriculum, the second one is the assessment, and the third one is the pedagogy. So the pedagogies are changing, assessment processes are changing, and also to some extent the curriculum is changing. Today what we would like to do is to give you a full picture of the curriculum, and being an initiative from a private organization, obviously the question of making sure that whatever we are proposing as a very new phenomena or a revised version has to be a sellable one. The society has to accept it. Unfortunately, any change in education in India is opposed tooth and nail by everybody, by the government, by the regulators, by the teaching community, by the parents, and therefore there has been some discussion amongst us. We created one model, but that model got little shocked or rocked by when we presented it to the parents and the prospective students. And so we are in a dilemma in terms of what needs to be done in moving forward. So we also would like your guidance on that in some sense. And this is not the last meeting in some sense. We are going to have a dialogue with you. So maybe once every 6 months we will meet and we will try to get your guidance so that moving forward, since it's a 4-year program of a BDES, and there is also a new curriculum called MDES. So I would consider this to be a group which will meet very often in terms of once in 6 months at least. And so we will be guided by your experience, your feedback in some sense. When we first created, we have gone over the last 1 year of discussion. When we first created and when we said this is truly a Bachelor of Design and Technology. Unfortunately, such a title doesn't exist either in UGC or in AICT. So we were immediately told that this cannot be done because this title doesn't exist. And therefore it will take another 2 years for you to approve this title. So in some sense we accepted BDES and MDES because these are the titles which are accepted by UGC as well as AICT, and hence we are using these titles. Fortunately, as we did it in IIT Kanpur, this time also we said we would like to network with some of the institutions which are having similar philosophies of education, and therefore the Aalto University in Finland was one of them, and I think Dr. Chakradev had been there. We will follow up that visit in some sense. There is another experiment which has happened in the last 7-8 years, very successful. It's called Singapore University of Technology and Design. This is a very new university, extremely successful and well established in Singapore with the help of MIT USA. And this also, they have also expressed willingness to collaborate in some sense. The word collaboration is a very loaded word, and therefore we are saying that each one of them will help us in some form. The third one is, of course, the Olin College. In fact, most of our thoughts have been inspired by Olin College of Engineering. I don't know how many of you know. It's a small but very prestigious college in Boston, near Boston, as a matter of fact. And Olin College is probably another very successful experiment in education which has been promoted in the last 10-15 years. Besides these institutions, we have got several other institutions like the iFoundry at UIUC and some other experiments. We are trying to network with all of them to make sure that whatever we are doing, at least we know that there are some people. We also have got a sort of a contract coming up with the Fab Lab office in Boston. And there is also the DMI, that is the Design Management Institute in Boston, and we will also have collaborations with them. And as I said, I will just leave at this particular point, that there is a difference between being a designer and a design thinking person. So the whole philosophy of this education that we are trying to weave around is that the basis or the underlying theme is design thinking as compared to simply a product design or a visual communication design, or in some sense what the divisions of design that were created earlier. We are all knowing that the role of technology is also very important in the realization or in translation of ideas into reality, and therefore the aspects of technology are also embedded into the curriculum, and that is a part of that professional education that we were talking about. And so we have now a very what you can call structure which has evolved over the last 1 year, and we would like to present it.